And it was so nice to like immediately be dropped into a group of people and like start building relationships. And rather than just landing in the country solo, going to a job that maybe I had secured on the internet or something, I was already like in a built-in group of friends.
Welcome to the Venture-Ette podcast, where women from all over the world share their stories of travel, moving abroad, and creating a new life for themselves, hoping to inspire you to live out your dreams by showing you how other women did it. I'm your host, Venture-Ette, Ashley.
Hello, welcome to Venture-Ette podcast. I'm Ashley, and I hope you're doing okay today. It's another day in this new norm, and what I'm doing is just pushing through the best way I can every day. I'm staying productive. I'm exercising, just moving my body any way I can, going for walks. So I hope you're doing something too that's really helping you during this time. Today, I have another story for you all. It's from my friend, Lindsey. I met her in 2016 when I was living in Hanoi, Vietnam. And we really clicked right away just because she is just very energetic and bubbly and just positive. So she's just someone you just want to be around all the time. But what I really found really interesting about her was the fact that she had moved to Vietnam with her boyfriend, and they were living this life together of living abroad and traveling. And she originally started off her journey solo, and she eventually met her boyfriend while living abroad. And I just thought, wow, that's amazing, because I just feel like there's just people that think that just because you're in a relationship, you need to give up your dreams of living abroad and traveling. And that doesn't have to be the case. I feel like as long as you find a partner who, not just has the same values as you, but also the same outlook on life and how they want to experience life, you can still continue to live out your life the way you've always wanted to, if that does include travel and living abroad. So they've been together now for quite a few years, and they've continued to just literally just circling the globe every year, moving from one country to another, and have just all these amazing experiences together. But even though they're doing that, Lindsey has still been able to grow so much as a person and as a woman, just as an individual, which I think is also very important. So I'm really happy to have Lindsey on today and share her story as to how she's gotten to this point, and share the stories of the things she's done, and also share her experiences of how it's been doing it with someone else. Because as you know, it's one thing to travel alone, but it's a whole other experience to do it with a partner. And right now, Lindsey is going to be talking to us from Georgia, the country. She is there with her boyfriend during this time, and they're going to wait it out there. So I'm excited for her to share how things are going for them right now and how that experience has been as well. So I am so pleased to welcome my friend, Lindsey.
Hi, Lindsey. How are you doing?
Doing all right, given the state of the world. How about you?
Same, just trying to hang in there. So for someone who's lived such a nomadic lifestyle, how has it been right now having to really stay still?
Honestly, it didn't really affect my plans for the short term that much. So yeah, we had already planned to be in Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, for about a month, just to work online and kind of take a break from traveling and then just save a little bit. That's kind of been our lifestyle the past 9 months or so. It's like stay in one place for a few weeks, work for a bit, and then take a couple weeks to travel. So it was already going to be one of those stationary times. And then obviously that period is just going to be extended by a month or 2 months or 3, or at this point, we're not really sure. But yeah, at least we're in a good place where we kind of got the bulk of our big traveling done. And now we were just sort of like going to hang out and work for a bit.
So you were ready to kind of stay put for a while anyways.
Yeah, that was the plan. We're really lucky that it didn't affect any big travel plans, like I'm sure it has for millions of people,
Yeah, no, it definitely has for me as well. But, it's okay. Sometimes it's good to just stay in one place for a while.
Yeah, that's a positive outlook. Yeah,
exactly. But I mean, this is something I feel like you've kind of been used to. I mean, you've done quite a bit of traveling, or not so much traveling, but even like moving around when you were younger.
Yeah, when I was answering some of your questions, it kind of made me rethink about that stuff that I hadn't thought about in a while. But yeah, I guess I grew up kind of moving around quite a bit. And then travel was just always like a part of like my family, my extended family, and something that I always knew I wanted to experience more for myself as an adult. So I think that kind of planted the seed early on.
Yeah, you were born in Texas, but you said you moved around in the US a bit and even like lived in Saudi Arabia when you were younger. How old were you when you lived there?
I was really young. I think it was between the ages of like 3 or 4 to like 6 or 7. So, like, what memories I have, it's hard to say if they're even memories outright or just like memories or like stories. Or we'd look at videos growing up or pictures and like that sort of like attaching a memory to something like that. But like I said, it kind of planted the seed and it always made me think about places beyond just where I was growing up.
Yeah, because even though like you don't really remember you being in like in Saudi Arabia, you remember the little trinkets that you said that you had around the house when you moved back to the US.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're just like little reminders everywhere, which is something cool that my parents did while they traveled. They would always like pick up kind of unique, more than souvenirs. I mean, we never had like weird magnets on the fridge or anything, but like different pieces of art or like instruments, dolls, toys, especially since my sister and I were young when we were traveling. So they picked up a lot of like mementos that then I also grew up with. And yeah, it was a big part of my childhood.
Yeah, so you always had little reminders around the house. So like one day I will go back and actually like remember these experiences abroad. So you came back to the US when you were about to go into 8th grade, right? You moved to Ohio.
We had been living in the South for a bit, like outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and then Alabama for a bit, which is kind of weird, kind of growing up in the South. But then, yeah, we moved to Ohio right before I was in 8th grade and then pretty much stationary there.
Yeah, so obviously that's like a huge difference from like Louisiana or like Saudi Arabia. So how was life growing up there? You said it was very kind of traditional in terms of like the lifestyle, going for the American dream of some sort.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty quintessential, like small town. I mean, not too small, like middle sized town, but like white picket fence, like manicured lawns, like everybody goes to church on Sunday and pretty quiet, like vanilla Americana stuff. I mean, I'm not saying anything's wrong with that, but I think after living in that for a long time, I was ready to start like pushing out of that comfort zone and trying to explore other places.
Yeah. Because you said like you finished school there, you even went to college in Ohio, but you eventually moved to Washington, D.C. So how was that change for you?
Yeah, that was a big change. I mean, for someone who like hadn't really done much traveling, even within the States, like growing up, we'd always go to California because that's where my mom's family members lived, like extended family. Or we do like trips to Florida for vacation, but never really doing even much big trips, even in the States. And so moving to DC was like a huge introduction to like what is beyond. And yeah, I loved my time in DC. It's such a vibrant, diverse city. You have all of the embassies and you have a lot of like international influences, great restaurants. I mean, you can find just about any kind of cuisine from any part of the world there and, world-class museums and things like that. So that was like a huge step up for me.
No, it sounds amazing. And that's what I love about big cities is all the diversity, that there's there, especially like with restaurants and the type of people and stuff. But sometimes I feel like you just like want a little more. Sometimes you want it to be like a little more authentic in terms of like actually being in that place where that originated from.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that was something I was still yearning for until I took the leap. It was something that I thought about as sort of like a far off idea, but I didn't pull the trigger for even years later, just because it was an intimidating idea.
Yeah, and it's definitely an intimidating idea for most because it's like, oh, that would be nice, but you just keep it as an idea, like, oh, that'd be nice. But then I feel like you eventually reach a breaking point, like, oh my gosh, no, I actually want that to be a reality. So you said that you were kind of looking at other options, and one option was possibly like working for National Geographic.
Yeah, I mean, that was also like a very far off, distant dream. I majored in journalism in like magazine sequence specifically. And I kind of had this idea that I would end up working for some kind of publication that would like send me to places that were maybe foreign or exotic or I mean, pretty lofty dreams, even if you're at the top of your game and probably in an industry like that for a decade, those are still like very coveted opportunities. So at some point, I kind of had to let that dream, move that aside and pursue some other options because at the rate I was going and at the level of my talent, it was probably not going to happen in this lifetime.
Yeah. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, you never know. But like you also said that, let's say if you did, you would probably still just kind of have the same type of lifestyle where you're still like in one place and you still have like a desk to go to. And that's something that you were just really looking to change, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even friends I have now who travel a lot for work or traveled in a time before Corona, I'd kind of like look at that and see the value in something like that being sent somewhere for your work. But then also hearing them lament not really having time to experience these places that they're being sent to. Maybe they have one afternoon or they can tack on one day of free time on top of their business trip or something. And I always wanted more. If I wasn't going to live in a place for an extended period of time, I at least wanted to start slow traveling and really start experiencing places rather than just like a short trip here and there. For me, it wasn't about like checking off boxes. It was more about having like really deep, rich experiences in different cultures.
Yeah. And that's what makes travel so beautiful. I mean, it's one thing to go for a place for like a weekend or a week, but you don't really truly get to like learn about a place until you actually stay there for an extended period of time and actually really see like the way of living and how people truly are, not just to tourists, but just to people in general.
Yeah, definitely. Time. It's such a luxury for most people to pursue anything that you enjoy. So I feel very fortunate that I found a way to really spend so much time traveling, which is really important to me now.
Yeah. So you came to this realization of like, okay, I don't want to just travel. I really want time and places. So you decided in order to do that to teach English.
Yeah, it just kind of made sense and it all fell into place. I knew a couple people who had done something similar, whether in Thailand or Vietnam or, different places. And yeah, it was sort of this itch that I knew I'd want to scratch at some point in my life. I'd always toyed with the idea of going into education like years earlier. I'm a pretty creative person. I'm hands-on. Like I love interactions and I was kind of starved for that for a bit working in DC at like a desk job, a great job, but in an office in front of a computer screen from 9 to 5, 5 days a week. So teaching seemed like such a very different experience that I thought that I would try. And it also came with an experience living abroad. So it kind of killed two birds with one stone and it just made sense for me at the time.
Yeah, no, that's a nice thing about teaching. Like you said, like for someone who is a creative person, it's a really great way to kind of explore your creativity and also just like interact with other people, well, your students in such a creative way, which is why I think it's such a big reason why it draws so many people is because you get to do that.
Yeah, from all different walks of life, different backgrounds, different, majors. Teaching is something that I think a lot of people are drawn to. And I think it's even better when you can bring your other experiences, like from a past life or a past career or something, and bring that into your teaching. It just makes it that much richer.
Exactly, which makes it just so much more fun. And especially because, you are a foreigner living in another country, I feel like the students see you in such a way that you just feel just excited to be there because you really feel the energy that they want to see you. So they're like, I want to see you too, and
yeah, definitely. My first teaching experience in Thailand was at a government high school, and the students were just enamored with the foreign teachers. And it's also like a very strange reception of teachers in general. Like teachers are held in very high regard in Thai culture. And I had students that would come to my office hours on their knees, sort of like almost bowing. And it was just like such a bizarre experience growing up in like public schools in America where like teachers have to fight tooth and nail for respect. And then suddenly to be in classrooms where like kids were I mean, I definitely had troublemakers as well, but there was just so many different layers of a different culture on top of like a new teaching experience.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. So it's like a great way for not only your students to learn, but also for you to learn as well. But you ended up, going to Thailand. But how did you find your job in Thailand and get your teaching certification? Was that an easy process?
Right. So one of the girls I knew who had taught in Thailand did a TESOL program that was a 120-hour in-person TESOL training course over 3 weeks in Thailand. And then the company essentially guarantees you a job afterwards, a placement somewhere in the country. And so having talked to her about her experience, and it kind of instilled confidence in me, and it seemed like a good option. So they sort of arranged that for me. And yeah, it was a great experience. Like the training itself, it was in Phuket in this incredible beach resort. And the people I met there are such wonderful people that I still keep in touch with now and like continue to be friends with years later. And it was so nice to like immediately be dropped into a group of people and like start building relationships. And rather than just landing in the country solo, going to a job that maybe I had secured on the internet or something, I was already like in a built-in group of friends. And that made such a huge difference, really. And I think it really affected my experience and why I continue to stay there.
Yeah. And that's the thing with like those kind of programs or doing something like that to start off with, I think is so important because you do build that community right away. And especially when you're in this position where, you're a little vulnerable, you might be a little nervous, maybe a little scared, but to be around people that have the same mindset as you or the same idea of what they want for their lives, it really like just kind of boosts your confidence and just makes you feel so much better about your decision. And especially so because you said, even though you were excited for this, your parents weren't really too excited about this idea.
Yeah, it didn't come off quite as well as I thought it would. But I mean, looking back on it now, it's crazy. It's actually been about 6 years to the day that I left and set out on this new adventure, which is wild because I really only thought I was going to do it for like half a year. And so I thought that that would appease them. I was just going to go and try out this experience and then I would come back. But of course, I think just having my best interest at heart, they worried about me leaving the life that I had built, leaving a steady job and selling my things and packing up and moving across the world. Like any parent, I think would be a little bit wary. But it was tough still having to be pretty firm in my resolve and still following through with it anyway.
Yeah, it's one of the things you just kind of have to follow your gut. I mean, no matter what. Because also, too, you said you didn't have like too much savings at the time. You just really went for it.
Yeah, I mean, I had been living and working in DC for a few years. And yeah, like I said, had a good job, had a good life. But as I was like a few years out of college, I was also enjoying having expendable income for the first time, really. And I was starting to travel at that time. So I was taking some trips abroad, traveling across the country quite a bit, meeting up with friends. So, I had a great time. I also was living in a pretty expensive city. I didn't have as much saved as probably should have, but it did just kind of come down to a now or never thing. I could keep pushing it back and setting different goals, but at some point it seemed like it needed to happen. So I just did it.
Yeah, no, and good for you. And I mean, you were how old at the time when you moved abroad?
I was 27, which is quite a bit older than a lot of the people I met in my program. Many of them were like maybe just out of college or like a few years out of college, but I had already had a career. I'd had a few jobs out of college since then, had lived through most of my 20s, had a great time, but it really was like starting a whole new chapter.
And especially like in Asia, I mean, like you said, you got there and immediately you were lucky enough to like build this community right away. But how was actually like living in Thailand? Because you didn't move to Bangkok, you moved to a smaller town.
Right. So that was part of the program that I did was this uncertainty that you sign up for. They guarantee you a job placement, but there's no guarantee where, which was kind of exciting at the time. And I had in my mind sort of like this picture of me like living out in the jungle or like on a beach in some really small village and being like the only foreigner for like miles around. That wasn't the case. Like I wasn't in Bangkok, but the city that I was placed in is probably like an hour-ish drive north of Bangkok. And it's like the old capital of Thailand when it used to be Siam. And so it's really historic and like has beautiful temples everywhere. And like, it's actually like a tourist destination. So people will come from Bangkok even for like a day trip or like spend time there. And so there was like a community of foreigners there already, and then kind of like this steady flow of travelers that would pass through. And yeah, it wasn't a small town by any means. Bangkok was only a van ride away. It was kind of a perfect place actually to be placed.
Yeah, it's funny how like initially you're like, this is not what I expected and maybe not what I wanted. But then it turns out to be like a much better experience than you had expected.
Yeah, I mean, better than I could have ever imagined. The name is Ayutthaya, and it's one of the most magical places I've ever been to, hands down. And it's a place I continue to go to just about once a year now. It seems like I'm always finding an excuse to go back and visit people or meet up with friends. Yeah, it's a wonderful place.
It's also too a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Yes, yeah, the whole like old town, we called it the island. It's inland, but it's surrounded by rivers. And so it does form a sort of like island, which is very strategic back when it was the capital and like a fortified city. It's absolutely stunning. You can rent bicycles or motorbikes and just like spend days going to all these temples, old ruins. It's lovely.
Yeah, I mean, you weren't on an island, but that still sounds, just as beautiful to be surrounded by that kind of historical beauty and temples and parks. So you were there, you had your community, your teaching, but you ended up meeting someone very special while you were living there.
Yeah, I met Christian. It was a few months after I moved there. I moved there in like April, May. I think he moved there in like August.
Yeah. And then started this long, partnership and relationship between you guys. And it's kind of funny. It's one of those things that obviously probably would have never happened had you not moved to Thailand.
Yeah, it is weird. It definitely changed the trajectory of my life, although we have very similar life goals and sort of worldviews. So it became a very good partnership and we're a good team. And yeah, I like him.
Yeah, no, everyone does. I mean, he's like such a great guy. So, I mean, you ended up staying in Thailand for a year and a half, and then you and Christian together decided to move together.
Right. It was sort of a big step because, yeah, I had never moved in with a significant other before that. And all of a sudden we were moving from one foreign country to another one. So I think it was a pretty unique situation. But yeah, a great one, because that's where we met you in Hanoi.
Exactly. So just to kind of give a little more about how you guys transitioned. So you guys had been together in Bangkok for how long in terms of dating?
We had been together probably about a year by the time we moved to Hanoi. So it did just kind of like progress very quickly. But it did get to this point towards the end of our time in Thailand that, sort of this feeling like party's over, like a lot of people we knew had started moving away or moving on to different places. And we did a trip to northern Vietnam, just the two of us, and traveled around there and met up with some friends. And Aaron, Aaron, who had moved to Hanoi and was also living and teaching there. So we actually stayed with her and had an amazing time. And I think it really influenced our decision to move there because we were already looking for like the next place. We knew that we wanted to continue living abroad. We just weren't sure where yet. And staying with her, meeting all of her friends, going to all of her favorite places in Hanoi, like really getting a feel for the expat scene and just like the vibe in Hanoi, I think it made a huge decision. And I remember like sitting in a cafe in the old quarter, Christian and I were talking and we were like, yeah, we could live here. We could definitely live here. And so then we went our separate ways to go back and visit our families. And during that time, we were just sort of aggressively looking online, trying to find jobs. And that was how we found our next job that would take us to Hanoi.
Yeah. And you used Dave's ESL cafe, right? To find your job?
I think it was, which seems so cliche, but there's a lot of stuff on there.
Yeah, no, there is. I've used it quite a bit as well. No, it's
kind of like the Craigslist of like ESL jobs. It's not like a great site, but it's got a lot of stuff on there if you can sift through it.
Exactly. I mean, it takes a bit of time, but you do eventually find, the diamond in the rough. So you move like somewhere with Christian, your boyfriend. And also too, I want to say that like, even though you guys had only been together for a year, I feel like when you are living abroad, the relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship or a friendship, I feel like those relationships really like deepen very quickly because you are so far away from your home and from your family.
Definitely. Yes, for sure. Every experience just feels more intense, more vibrant. Definitely.
It just accelerates very quickly. That's what I've come to find out after living abroad. You're like your friendships and then these romantic relationships, they just go from like 0 to 60 very quickly.
Well, there's this shared like experience of like being somewhere different, being somewhere new. Yeah, you're kind of like bonding with people in like totally different ways than you would back in your home country or hometown. Yeah, very intense.
Yeah, very intense, So obviously, yeah, like of course it would make sense to like move somewhere together if you really wanted to continue like your relationship.
Yeah. And both of us, we both wanted to continue to live abroad. So we were of the same mindset. There was never any rift in like, oh, I want to go back to the States or like, I need to live here. We were both so open in our willingness to go anywhere as long as it was somewhere different and foreign.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like with any relationship, as long as you're on the same page as to what you want, then it's fine. You can move forward together. So you guys moved to Vietnam, and that was a much easier transition, because one, you move with someone, but then also you already knew quite a bit of people when you moved there.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say a ton, but because we knew our friend Erin, who was living there, then we were introduced to all of her friend group. And then, yeah, like through work, we immediately like were dropped into a whole other like community and social group, much larger than the one I had experienced living in Thailand, because it was a much larger city too. But I think, yeah, I was definitely ready for a step up, and Hanoi is a pretty exciting city.
Yeah. And there's always like some sort of social event because I feel like what really helped too was because of the company that we were all working for. It was so big, massive. You met people constantly.
Right. Yeah. The extended community. It's something that I do definitely miss since we've been traveling, kind of like living the more nomadic lifestyle. It's just like having that community, especially like, even if it's through work. I feel like that's sort of a cop out, like the easiest way to build a community because it's something that you don't really have to seek out. It just sort of like happens if you're in a job or in a company that has a lot of people. But yeah, as you know, like it can be tough when you're like working for a virtual company and you don't have those like colleagues or built-in coworker friends.
Yeah, and that personal interaction as well, because I mean, it's one thing to have like a virtual community online, but then it's a total different thing when you actually have like this in-person community around you.
Yeah, no, definitely.
But luckily for you guys is that even though you guys are in a relationship, you guys always still made such an effort to constantly meet people and like be around groups of people. And I feel like that's really worked to your guys' advantage.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, I think that's so important just to have lives outside of each other. Yeah, develop other relationships with people and have other friends. And yeah, we had such a big community in Hanoi. It was just sometimes overwhelming how many people there were. But yeah, it's something I look back on and really cherish.
Same here. I do miss it, quite a bit with the group of friends that we had and all the social gatherings. But did you find anything kind of like difficult in your time, like living in Hanoi, even though you had like such a great community?
Um, Difficult. I mean, like anything, when you go to a new place, there's gonna be some growing pains, learning a new language, like adapting to a new culture.
When you were in Thailand, did you end up learning a lot of Thai when you were there for the year and a half?
No, I'm ashamed at how little I learned. But I always thought that I was going to be there for like 5 months. And then I would sign up for another semester and I'd be like, oh, it's just another few months. And then I sign another one and it's like, oh, there's just another few months. Looking back on it, if I had known I was going to stay so long, I would have made a bigger effort. But yeah, beyond the basics of greetings, directions, ordering food,
just kind of the basics. Yeah.
right. And so I did not make as big of an effort, which is why when we moved to Vietnam, that was something that we were both interested in doing and actually taking Vietnamese lessons and like making a bigger effort, which I think makes such a difference.
It really does, especially because like the expat community, even though it was kind of big, it really didn't in no way kind of match the amount of Vietnamese people that live in Hanoi naturally because you're in Vietnam. So it definitely makes such a difference being able to communicate with the locals in their language. You see how much they light up when you make an effort to speak Vietnamese.
Yeah. I mean, mine was still pretty bad, but definitely better than my Thai. I will say that.
No, well, I mean, at least you tried. So you moved to Hanoi, but you ended up staying there for a year because you guys were starting to prepare for one of your biggest trips ever at that point together as a couple, especially. You did a bro trip.
Right. So yeah, we knew that we were going to stay in Hanoi for at least a year because we signed our contracts and, we wanted to have some stationary like stability, which for a lot of people, I realize a year is not very long to be in one place, but it was for us. So, right, we were kind of working towards this big Vietnam bike trip, which was one of the most challenging things I think I've done. I had never driven a motorbike until I came to Vietnam. And then while we were living in Hanoi, I was driving a semi-automatic, which is, still a step up from an automatic. But I knew that when I did the bike trip, I'd want to drive a manual just because you have more control of the bike and just in general with like repairs, manuals just seem to be like a better option for doing any kind of long-term trip. So that was a big step up for me, was buying a bike, a manual bike, learning how to drive it.
How long did it take you to learn to drive a manual?
Honestly, about a day. So,
oh, really? Oh, wow.
I guess because I had already driven a semi-automatic, it wasn't that crazy of a step up. It was just sort of like rewiring my brain a bit. But I only learned a few days before we actually left on our trip. So I was doing a lot of like really like getting comfortable when we were already on the road, which is pretty terrifying at the time. But yeah, I mean, I survived. So I guess that's a good sign.
I have to say kudos to you. I only drove an automatic. I never even learned how to drive a semi.
Yeah, in the city, it totally makes sense. But I don't know if I would have gotten up some of the mountains on an automatic.
Oh, no, you wouldn't have, because I did some road trips on an automatic. They were like 2 hours one way, so 4 hours total. And it was brutal. I do not recommend it for anyone. Get a semi or a manual if you're going to do any road trip, for sure.
Yeah.
So where did you go on your road trip in Vietnam? Because you didn't really get a chance to explore everywhere, but you got to explore quite a bit.
Right. So we had allocated 2 months for that trip. And the idea was we would do like a loop in the north. So starting in Hanoi and then going all the way around the whole northern region, all the way up to the border of China, and then back around to Hanoi, and then taking a month to go all the way to Ho Chi Minh City. And after doing a month in the north, it was like the perfect amount of time. I mean, of course, I could have stayed longer and spent more time in places, but a month was a good amount of time. And then when we started going south, we kind of realized that it was just too much. Vietnam's a big country and it's so diverse. And it really is kind of like chunked up into the north, the central, and the south. And so we just kind of made the decision to alter the trip, and rather than blast ass to Ho Chi Minh City and not really enjoy our time in the places we already were, we did basically spend the rest of our time doing a loop around the central region. So going all the way to the border of Laos and then back up and around. So it's something I feel is kind of like an unfinished trip because I'd love to go back and then spend a month in the South. I don't know when I'll do that, but it's definitely up there. But I'm so glad that we spent longer in fewer places and in one region rather than rushing the trip.
Exactly. Because also too, even though you stayed in one region, you said it was probably one of the most difficult things that you've ever done. And I can imagine that sitting on a bike for so long would be not the easiest thing, but what else made it like so difficult? I feel like both mentally and physically.
Right. Being on a bike for hours every day is like physically taxing. I remember my wrist spasming from changing gears, and like you get so like cramped as you're like hunched over. And then like being out in the elements, I mean, just like in the blasting sun, like sweating it out, or like rain, or like splashing through mud and being in like roads that are not roads, pretty much like potholes and like landslides. And some of the driving was pretty intense, and it just takes so much concentration to not kill yourself.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, you have to really be alert at all times, even though you might be physically and mentally exhausted from driving all day. But that's part of the experience, right? Is that you're enjoying all this beauty, but you have to go through a little bit of pain.
Yeah, definitely. And it's truly, motorbike is the best way to see a country like Vietnam. And I have no regrets. Like, it was an incredible experience. And I feel like I really earned my stripes on that trip.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's something that I'm kind of interested in doing, but I don't know if I would go to that extent in terms of doing that kind of motorbike trip.
Yeah, it's possible to do shorter trips too. And I think those can also be super rewarding.
Yeah, and they are. Like, I did a few shorter ones, and I feel like for me that's, good enough. But if anyone ever goes to Vietnam, a motorbike trip for sure, short or a long one, is definitely recommended. So you guys finished, your trip, and then you guys ended up selling your motorbikes, right? Once you finished it?
So actually, we didn't. We finished our trip in Da Nang, which is sort of like the unofficial capital of the central region. And after we had decided to just do the central region, and it's sort of becoming a trend now that we went to Da Nang and also just really liked the scene there and thought, well, we'd like to come back and live here. And we had a friend that was living there who actually like owns his own cafe and art studio. And so he had space where he could keep our bikes. And so we actually left our bikes there with the intention of returning, which we did months later.
Yeah, because you guys finished your road trip and then you went traveling for a bit. You went to like Europe and the US.
Yeah, that was, I'm struggling to remember exactly how long of a time that was, but definitely a few months. And we went to Europe. Christian's parents live in northern Italy. So it was my first time visiting them there. They had come to Vietnam, so I had met them before, but that was the first time I had gone to their home and visiting other friends in Europe, which is another big perk of traveling, is meeting so many people and having friends all over the world that you can go and visit and stay with. So we had like a little European trip, and then to the States, where then Christian came to my parents' house, and we also did some traveling along the East Coast and then the West Coast, and eventually Hawaii was the last place.
Oh, wow. You really went from east to west.
Around the world. Yeah, it was a crazy trip, really.
Yeah. So like, how was traveling? Because you already done your motorbike trip, but before that, you guys were staying in one place. But this time you guys were really just like kind of backpacking. So how was that, especially doing that with a partner?
It was great. It was nice to be traveling by means other than a motorbike. So it's a little bit easier. And then obviously, like, places like Europe and the US are not nearly as challenging places to travel in. They're just more familiar. And
also too, you were with friends as well. So that makes it so much easier.
Definitely. It didn't feel like a real foreign travel experience. Even when I was going to new countries, it was very familiar and comforting in that way.
Yeah. Especially after having lived in, Vietnam for quite a bit of time, going to a place where it's more developed must have been a bit of fresh air.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's like a double-edged sword, because all that like chaos and uncomfortable craziness is kind of what I love about countries like Vietnam. But yeah, you're right. Definitely, like, coming to like a more developed country, like suddenly it's just so effortlessly easy to get around and like find things that you want and communicate, which can be refreshing.
Yeah. So like, how was coming back to the US? Because that was your first time in the US after quite a bit of time, right? Did you have any like culture shock going back?
Well, I'd been before after my time in Thailand. I mean, every time it's always like a bit of an adjustment. Although I think it's less and less so the more I do it. The first time I came back after Thailand was around Christmas time. And I really struggled with that, just because the consumerism of Americans during the days leading up to Christmas is just like obscene. And it was just like so much like in the stores, and like just so much like advertising and like buy. Like, it was really overwhelming after I'd been living kind of like a more simple life for a while. But I think that's like one of the biggest things that I'm always like so not surprised by because I've come to expect it, but just something that I notice a lot going back to the States is just like how much of everything there is. It's a very consumerist society and it comes with having wealth and, people are just constantly using that wealth and living great lives, bigger cars, bigger houses, like just everything's so big.
Yeah. I experienced that too when I came back for my first Christmas back a few years ago. And I was also a bit overwhelmed as well with like all the advertising and everything. And when you have distanced yourself from that for so long and then being like exposed to that again, yeah, you're just kind of like overwhelmed. And then you start to feel the pressure like, oh my gosh, I should start to buy too. Like,
yeah, one of the places I stopped, I think it was on that first time I came back to the States, I stopped in Boston and visited a really good friend. And I remember distinctly like we had gone out for the day and we had stopped in a couple stores and she was trying some clothes on. And she was like, well, aren't you going to try anything on? Aren't you going to buy anything? And I was like, there's not really anything I need. And she's like, well, I know, but like you could just still buy something, like even if you don't need it, which is something I would definitely have done before I had lived abroad or lived this different lifestyle. I mean, I definitely had an addiction to online shopping too. But it's like a very different mindset now, especially now that we've been like nomadic and I literally have 2 pairs of pants and like 3 shirts and like wear the same thing every other day. So it's like a very different mentality.
it really is. And it's sometimes crazy how it's just something like removing yourself from that, how that really affects you in terms of like how you do decide to spend your money and what you do decide to own. So I totally relate.
Yeah. And I think also like I'm so surprised when people say like, oh, I wish I could travel like you. I wish I could do that. And I'm thinking you're living off of like an American salary. Like if you just allocated your funds differently, or if you like cut certain things out, or you just saved a little bit more, you could travel. Like, but yeah, it's easy when you're there and you're so influenced by other people and just like the abundance of stuff that I don't know. It's just a different perspective.
No, it is. And so I totally get it. So, you go back and see your friends and family, but then you go back to Vietnam, to Da Nang, where you left behind your bikes.
Yeah, right. So we had kind of just decided that we wanted to live in Da Nang. And for context, as you know, it's like a smaller city than Hanoi, but it's still a city, but it's on the beach. It's like pretty laid back considering the chaos of Vietnam. And it's just like a really lovely place, surrounded by beach and mountains on the other side. And we just really fell in love with it. So we kind of just said we were going to move there and then figure it out from there. So we didn't have jobs lined up or anything. But as luck would have it, when we went back, I think we reached out to someone from our old company and just said, hey, we're going to be moving to Da Nang. We understand it's a coveted place, but if you ever like need help or substitute teachers or anything, like we'll be in the area and we're happy to help, just letting you know. And yeah, as luck would have it, they said that they had 2 positions opened and they said pretty much we could have them and we could be back at our own salary in a new center, but in Da Nang. And so we were prepared to not have it so easy, but we were really fortunate, I think, just in our timing. And then also we left in really good standing with the company and I guess it paid off.
No, it really did. No, everyone loved you guys. You were definitely missed once you left Hanoi. I feel like you guys were kind of the glue that kind of just like brought everyone together.
That's really sweet.
No, really though. So I'm not surprised that you guys left in good standing. And of course they had positions for you guys because you guys were also great teachers. But you guys, moved back to Da Nang. So this time, though, it was also temporary as well because you didn't want to stay there for too long because you also wanted to continue to travel, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, same deal. Like we knew we wanted to stay there for at least a year. Also, just because that was our commitment with our work contracts. And yeah, had a lovely time there. Also, we're so fortunate to have a good community of friends. But I guess we're always thinking of the next trip, which at that time we were trying to plan for a 4 months long trip in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. And that was going to be a really big one.
I remember that. So how did you guys plan for that? Especially for like a country like India, because I've been wanting to go, but I've heard that as much as worth it as it is to go, it's quite intense.
It is. I felt like all of my traveling up until then had like been preparing me for India. It was like the Super Bowl of traveling. But we just really picked the brains of our friends who had been there. I remember I just had like so many different Google Docs full of like people's recommendations, or like I took pictures of people's like travel journals, and I was just gathering so much information because we had known people, thankfully, who had been to all those places, which is like such a nice resource. And of course, like checking like the internet and looking at people's blogs, but there's nothing like talking to someone that you know who has been to those places. And so, yeah, really fortunate that we could have those resources. And yeah, we had a loose plan for India, and we probably did more than we should have in 2 months' time, which seems like a long time, but India is massive. You can spend years there and barely scratch the surface. But so we started in Kerala in the south, and then over 2 months worked our way all the way north as far as Himachal Pradesh. And we mostly stuck to the west. So I think that helped.
Just kind of sticking to an area.
Exactly. As much as we wanted to like jet across and go to Pondicherry or like go to some places that were further away, it just made more sense to stick to one side. So we just kind of traveled up the western coast and mostly stuck to that route.
Wow. Yeah, no, I really want to go, but I've heard that you need to do at least a month, but even a month is not even enough. And now you're saying 2 months is not even enough. It's just like, oh gosh.
Yeah. And it depends on the person, and like, it depends on the type of traveler you are. And I think just like the older I get and the more I travel, the longer I need in a place, which, is going to make it tough to see a lot of places if I need to take like months at a time.
It might be more places, but richer places.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it's not about ticking off boxes. It's just about having these incredible experiences.
Yeah, because then you also, like you said, you went to Nepal and you did
the Annapurna circuit.
Exactly. And how long did that take you to do?
So we were in Nepal for about a month, but the actual trekking was like less than 3 weeks, maybe like 19, 20 days of trekking, which is on the longer end. I mean, you could spend longer, but there's even people who will do it in like half the time. But there's ways you can cut corners by like taking Jeep rides or like flying into one place and cutting off like the beginning and the end of the trek. But yeah, we were purists and we did it from the beginning to the end all on foot.
Oh, wow. And now I remember seeing like your Instagram and like following your stories, and it just looked amazing. And do you feel like this was also kind of just as difficult as doing the motorbike trip you did in Vietnam?
Yeah, I mean, it's up there as one of the most challenging things I've done. I mean, it's physically demanding, but it's doable. Like we saw people in their 50s and 60s doing it, and I've heard of teenagers doing it. So it's nothing crazy. I think it's just the whole idea of trekking something that long and on foot for me was something I had never done before. And mentally, it's something that it's pretty unique for me, at least. I'd done nothing else like it.
I feel like for anyone, it would be a unique experience because I feel like, over the years, you really have been trying to push yourself more and more, like physically and mentally with a lot of the trips that you've done.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to take a vacation. I don't really know what that means. So for me, it's always about like travel is about new experiences, pushing myself out of my comfort zone, experiencing something different, feeling uncomfortable, feeling out of my element. It seems to be the trend now.
Yeah, no, I feel like, that's what you really search for is an experience, right? Some people, like you said, like, they just want a vacation and, kind of just relax, but you are just like, no, I want to constantly keep moving in some way.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm sure I'll spend lots of time in the future, maybe when I'm old and I can sit on a beach or do that stuff when I'm old and decrepit. But while I'm young and able, I feel like I need to do all the crazy stuff.
Yeah, especially while you're able to. And especially too, like, I think like right now you get to do this experience for yourself, but then you also get to share these experiences like with Christian, with your partner. And so how has that been for you guys who are like a couple, but like are doing these types of things together?
Yeah, I mean, they would be intense things on their own, but then with a significant other, it can add a whole other layer of meaning or strain. But I think we're lucky that we really are on the same page about so many things, and it has clicked since the beginning. And we make a really good team, like while traveling and even when we're not traveling. I mean, not saying that there aren't like difficult times, but I think even then it is nice to have someone there that, if one person isn't at their best, the other one can kind of help and be someone to get you through that hurdle. And yeah, I'd say it's definitely a positive thing.
Yeah, no, of course you have someone there to still like push you, even when, like you said, like you feel like you're kind of maybe not feeling your best, someone is there to kind of help pull you back up. So like, how do you guys push through? Like if there is any difficulty, like what do you guys do that really help push you to move forward together?
I guess just being as supportive as possible and just trying to listen to each other when you're going through a tough time. But
I agree. Yeah, no, listening and just kind of just being there, I feel like is the most important. So you guys have been, living quite a nomadic lifestyle at this point. Instead of like teaching at a school like you guys did prior, you guys are really just kind of are sticking to online work.
yeah, that's what we've been doing since last summer. And it's a totally different type of travel as well, just because now there's income while we're doing it rather than having to save and, count our pennies and then like have a long hiatus from work. It's nice to be able to travel and have an income. It feels like we can continue it for a lot longer. It's not as much of a finite time, like counting down the days until we have to go back and get a job again. Like we're financially secure no matter where we go for as long as we want to keep doing this.
Exactly. And so you guys still teach online, right?
Mm-hmm.
So of course, that's the great thing about like teaching is that like you can do it like abroad in schools, but you can also do it like online. It's nice to have that flexibility of both.
Yeah, it's something I never thought that I would actually do. To be honest, like scoffed at the idea and was like, oh no, like the whole idea why I wanted to get into teaching was to be in the classroom and to have the experience. But as I continued living abroad, I saw the value and the merit in being flexible and having this under my belt. And I know that even once I get a full-time job, I'll still continue to do this on the side, which is great, especially when you work for a company that has no minimum hours and you can kind of pick it up whenever you need it or whenever you want to. The flexibility is really why I did it.
Yeah. So because you guys work online, it's allowed you to explore even like lesser known like countries a lot easier. Like you're in Georgia right now, but you went to also like Albania and like you explore like the Balkans a lot more.
Right. Yeah. So this recent time, basically, so we went back to the States in October and then to Italy in November, again, to see Christian's parents. And also I have a really good friend who lives in Florence. It was so nice. We had sort of this like Friendsgiving thing and like invited a bunch of our friends. Christian has a lot of friends around Europe. And it was like this really wonderful, like international gathering that we had at the end of our time in Italy. And that was kind of like a nice send off. And then from there, we went to Prague first, then to Berlin, then to Budapest, and then to Sarajevo, which is the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and spent a while in Bosnia. And we actually were working. So we got a flat in Sarajevo for a few weeks and we were working there. And then we took some time and traveled Bosnia, Montenegro, Croatia just for a hot minute to go to Dubrovnik, Albania, and then Greece before we're coming to Georgia.
Oh, wow. You guys have kept busy. So obviously, you're now like in Georgia, and because of what's going on, like how have you felt having to stay in Georgia? Because you didn't decide to go home. You decided to stay.
Right. So, yeah, it was kind of a weird time because the whole time we were traveling through the Balkans, it seemed like the virus was kind of like making its presence known more and more, but it was still so early. And I speak for myself and probably a lot of people in the world that we never saw it becoming as crazy and as big as it became. So while we were traveling, we were aware of it, but it wasn't until we got to Georgia when everything was still fine. Flights were functional, restaurants were open. We were, experiencing life for the most part at some level of normalcy. And then about a week after we arrived, the country closed off its borders and stopped all flights and closed all non-essential businesses. And it was sort of this like last chopper out of Vietnam situation where like the US was calling back its citizens, and it just seemed like it exploded so quickly. And for like a split second, I thought about going back to the States. And of course, my parents are like, you can come here at any time. Like, but ultimately, we just had to make the decision that we were going to wait it out here. And I think it was encouraging that the number of confirmed cases were so low here. Like at the time, it was like 100 maybe. And now it's only just over 200 confirmed cases with only like 3 deaths. And we kind of did like preliminary research and just seeing like how they're handling the situation and what expats were saying about it. And for the most part, we were pretty confident that they were taking like good steps. And it just kind of made sense for us to ride it out here rather than go to an airport or be on an airplane, which are just like, it seemed like the worst places to be at that time.
No, I agree. I feel like, if anything, if you're already kind of out there, it would just kind of make it worse for you to just kind of be in an airplane or in an airport. And also too, so right now it's April 9th. So as of today, like it's only a little more than 300 confirmed cases still.
In Georgia.
In Georgia, yeah. In Georgia is a smaller country, but still it's just kind of like the ratio compared to like how it is here. It's a little better.
Yeah. Like looking at the US's numbers, it's staggering. And I know that it's isolated to, bigger metropolises for the most part. But yeah, I think also just the fact that we don't really have a home there. Like my parents live there, but I haven't lived in the States for 6 years now. And it'd be different if we were traveling. And of course, if we had a home to go back to, we would do that. And then obviously Christian's parents being in Italy, like that's not a great place to go either. Although they did say that we could go there, which is very nice. But, we were like, I think we'll stick it out here.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best move you guys could have made. But for the most part, how has Georgia been? Like I went to Georgia years ago and traveled around, and beautiful country. So how have you guys found it?
Obviously, it's a weird time to be here, as it would be a weird time to be anywhere. Like we had around a week to see like what life was like normally before everything shut down. And yeah, just that glimpse, we really liked it. We love the food here is so unique. The people seemed quite friendly despite the situation. I think there is sort of a wariness about foreigners right now, just because that seems like the case everywhere in different countries, that like it's foreigners that are bringing in the virus. So I think, yeah, it's a weird time to be anywhere. I hope while we're here, we'll see things return to normal and kind of get a better feel for life. But yeah, what glimpse I saw, it seems like a nice place.
No, it is. And obviously too, as you know, like the people so friendly. That's one of my biggest takeaways was that. So you're there right now. So despite of everything, what are some goals that you have for yourself this year in terms of like what you want to do and what you want to see?
Well, yeah, like eventually short-term goals, like I'd love to see more of this country if time and the virus allows it. But in terms of like other travel goals, like I said, we're really fortunate that up until this point, we've done the bulk of our traveling, and we really hadn't planned a lot beyond Georgia. Of course, we were supposed to go back to Italy in May to visit his parents and also go to my friend's wedding, which has been postponed, which is a huge bummer, of course, but probably for the best. But otherwise, yeah, we didn't really have any big plans other than to move to Taiwan this summer, which is still a goal. Again, if the world is still standing.
Yes. It's still good to have goals, even though if they might feel unlikely, it's still have something to look forward to.
Yeah. So that was going to be the next phase. By July, it'll be about a year since we had started teaching online and living this more nomadic lifestyle, which has been great. But both of us were looking forward to being stationary and kind of like putting down some roots for at least a year, hopefully 2, maybe more. We visited Taiwan a few years ago and like really enjoyed it. It's kind of like got a little bit of everything. It's still somewhat tropical. So it's not like moving to someplace like Japan or Beijing or Korea where like you have to contend with winter. Neither of us are a big fan of winter.
I think I've kind of noticed. Guys keep going to Southeast Asia where it's warmer.
Yeah, but it's also like a really vibrant, modern, like progressive country. And it seems like a natural like step up or a natural progression. And we do know some people there. So, which also seems to be a trend.
It's a good trend though. You want that kind of trend. Yes.
I don't want to build a whole community from scratch.
No, especially as you get older, it requires more effort, to do that. So I'm totally get it that if you're going to move somewhere, you much rather have it be a place where you actually know some people already.
Yeah, definitely. It makes the transition easier.
Exactly. So I hope, that does work out, fingers crossed. So you've moved around a lot, you've seen so much. So how do you feel that these experiences have changed you or have allowed you to grow as a person?
I think, in general, I feel like a much more well-rounded, worldly individual, just from having so many different experiences and meeting so many people from different places. And it has expanded my worldview so much. And travel is the best thing that you could possibly do for things like empathy and like understanding and tolerance. Like the more you see and the more people you meet and the more you realize everyone is just the same as you, really, it makes the world seem smaller but more full at the same time. And I think that's a huge part, just expanding my worldview and being more tolerant and humbling too. It's a very humbling experience.
It is very humbling. And I like what you said that like the more you see or the more people you meet, you start to see how much people really are like you. And I think that's like so important that like at the end of the day, like when you travel, everyone is working, to like make a living for themselves, to support themselves and their family. And I feel like that's such a basic thing of humanity of what everyone does on a day to day. And I feel like it's important for people to kind of recognize that, especially during this time, to realize that like we all kind of want the same needs in terms of like the basic necessities.
No, definitely. We're all the same. We all eat, we sleep, we laugh, we cry, we bleed. It's so easy to like think of people as being super different from you and not understanding them when you haven't met someone from a different place and you've only ever been surrounded by people that are the same. But until you meet those people, until you experience it yourself, experience different places, yeah, it's hard to know.
Yeah, it's hard to know. Exactly. So I think also too, with everything you've done so far, what's one thing that you've done that's really surprised you? Like you just never thought you would have ever done?
Man, all the stuff like the driving a motorbike across the country and the trekking in Nepal and driving a tuk-tuk in Sri Lanka. That was a crazy way to get around. I don't think I even knew that tuk-tuks existed like when I was growing up, let alone like thought I would drive one around a country. But also like, I think just being so open to the idea of like spending time with people from different places. And like, we've had some like really amazing couch surfing experiences or just like have met some really awesome people throughout our travels that as a kid or a young adult, even living in DC, I never would have thought that I would have like attended like a Sikh festival living in like the home of like a Sikh family and been literally like living under the same roof and being welcomed by them and treated by them like a family member. I never could have imagined myself doing that. Really.
It's really crazy, right? Like it's once you're like in the moment and you start to realize what's going on, it's just like, oh my gosh, this is real. And yeah, it's one of those things you don't ever think would ever happen to you. But it's amazing that when you open yourself up, what the experiences that like come to you because, you're so open. Beautiful experiences. But yeah, so you did this for yourself and for anyone else that wants to do this, like what advice would you give them?
So much of it is just like doing it and putting your money where your mouth is. Because I've known plenty of people who like, again, say, wow, you're so brave. Like I could never do what you do, or I wish I could do that. And I was not brave at all. I was terrified, but I just did it and had to figure out most of it along the way. But I have no regrets. And I say, you got to give it a shot and maybe you will have regrets, but at least you can say you did it at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, well said. I feel like, yeah, it's just taking that action and you've definitely taken that action several times. And I feel like it's definitely paid off in the end. So I just want to thank you again so much. I think with what you've done and especially with, not just doing it, not just yourself, but also being able to do it with someone else is also really amazing and such a rare thing. So yeah, you're definitely very lucky.
Yeah, I feel so fortunate. Like truly. Hashtag blessed. But I also think like you are so fortunate too. You are such a world traveler, and like so many people that we know or that I've met, like even more impressive and more amazing, and like have done so many more things than me and been to more places. And I am just one person, and so many other people have done this stuff before me and will continue to do it after me. So I don't want to be any kind of special, unique situation, because it's possible for anyone.
No, it is. But it's definitely, just taking the time to just kind of appreciate what you've been able to do, but then just, of course, appreciate what others have done. So thank you so much, Lindsey. We'll definitely have to chat again soon. So thank you.
Okay, take care.
For more information on travel and life abroad, go to Venture-Ette.com. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know by leaving a review. And be sure to follow me at Venture-Ette on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Safe travels, and until next time.